In a land of myth and a time of magic, the destiny of a great kingdom rests on the shoulders of a young boy. His name, Merlin.
Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another series review. And tonight's series review is none other than the series Merlin. So sit back, grab your shields, grab your pints, go down to the tavern, and prepare for a story of a lifetime. So, what is the story of Merlin about? Well, essentially, it's about a young warlock who must go into a kingdom during the height of the witchcraft trials. He must impersonate and associate himself as a non-magic. Because if the people of Camelot find out his true abilities, he will be hung at the stake or burned like the witches. It's a hard time for people with magic, and his only ability to be able to stay under the radar is to work for an old man named Gaius. However, on his first day into town, Merlin makes a name for himself by accidentally ending up in an argument with the Prince of Camelot, Arthur Pendragon. Now Arthur, being the cocky sod he is, begins to fight with Merlin using every weapon he can find in his arsenal. But the one thing he can't understand is how Merlin keeps managing to avoid his attacks. He begins to suspect foul play, but soon puts it out of mind after falling over on his face. Merlin then meets a blacksmith's daughter known as Gwen, who will later go on to become the wife of Arthur Pendragon. Gwen and Merlin quickly become friends, and the pair of them laugh about how Merlin kind of sees Arthur as nothing more than a donkey. Once he gets back to Gaius, Gaius warns him to stay out of Arthur's way, as he will be the future king of Camelot and could have Merlin's head on a stake. Merlin also meets on his journey into the castle a beautiful woman known as Morgana. Morgana is the adopted daughter of Uther Pendragon and pretty much lives alongside Arthur in the castle. Gwen is a handmaiden in the castle, which explains why Gwen gets in and out of the castle. Eventually, Merlin ends up in an agreement to help out Arthur as his handservant after saving his life from a witch who tried to poison him. Merlin goes up to dinner and finds that all of the guards have pretty much been poisoned, including Uther and Arthur. He has a battle with the witch and then exposes her to the king, who sends her to be burned at the stake. The witch warns Uther that she is not the first who will attempt to take his life, and she'll definitely not be the last. As the series progresses, Merlin and Arthur begin to build an army of knights, and these knights eventually become the Knights of the Round Table. Arthur and Merlin meet many goblins and magical creatures along the way, and Merlin even begins to hide the path behind Arthur every time that they're out somewhere in order to use his magic for good. But no matter how much he tries to persuade other magic users that he does not intend to hurt them, Merlin finds himself in a sticky situation in which he must betray his own for the greater good of his destiny. His destiny was once first told to him by a dragon who lived under the castle. This dragon spoke with a very fine-toned voice and pointed out that it is one of, if not the last of its kind. Merlin frees the dragon in hopes of letting it be free and live forward in its own ambitions. However, this kindness comes back to bite Merlin on the arse when the dragon returns later down in the series to attack Uther's castle, and Uther mans everyone in the castle to fight against it. Jump forward a few hundred years or so, it turns out that Merlin is stuck in an even darker piece of water. His destiny is finally catching up with him, and although the Saxons and the Vikings and everyone else in England and all of its kingdoms, it turns out that Merlin has a greater darkness to challenge. His best friend and the woman he loves, Morgana, has turned her back on Uther and has started performing the dark arts. Merlin is left with no other option but to poison Morgana, the one woman he would never want to harm. He is told by the dragon and his inner circle that the reason Merlin must do this is because if he doesn't, she will rise to be one of the greatest sorceresses ever to live. But the plan to kill her backfires, and it leaves her twisted and angry. She bitterly puts up with Merlin for a long time, but she doesn't realise exactly who he is. She doesn't realise his real name is Emerus. Now, Emerus, to anyone who doesn't quite know, is the name that he is given by the Druids. The Druids see many prophecies in which Morgana's reign will come to an end and Arthur shall rise again. But there is a tragedy behind this, and that is that Emerus must watch his friend die in battle. Merlin does everything to prepare, but keeping under the radar is becoming more and more harder to do, especially after a druid boy known as Morgaine happens to have snuck into Arthur's ranks. Morgaine was a druid boy who essentially Merlin saved along with Morgana years ago, as the pair of them were being hunted down by Saxons and other people alike. The druid boy was also being hunted down especially by Uther, as Uther wanted to wipe out any source of magic in the kingdom. But even in death, Uther haunted Arthur of all the wickedness that was in his heart, telling Arthur that he must become just as bad as he was. But Arthur decides a different path. He wants to be a good king. He wants to be a king who rules in a kingdom where people do not fear his name. Merlin tries to help him to accomplish this, but eventually when they get to the battleground, it turns out that Morgaine is on their track, and Morgaine gives Merlin up to Morgana. Morgana laughs a wicked wail as she begins to realise how often Merlin has got in her way of her destiny. Morgana was previously told of Emerus not by Morgaine, however, but by another witch, a witch from another coven, who warned that Emerus will be Morgana's undoing. As the battle draws closer and it becomes more violent, Merlin is eventually locked in a cave so that he cannot interfere with Morgana's victory. But the cave doesn't stop him, and instead it enlightens Merlin on the true sources of his power, his inner being with the power of the world itself. In many times during this series, there's a comedic irony in which Merlin turns into an old man. The reason the creators of the series did this is to essentially give the audience an idea of the Merlin people remember from the tapestries. The reason this is relevant is because Merlin turns into the old man during the final battle with Morgana, at least for a split second, to give a lot of the knights of Camelot and all the soldiers of Camelot a chance to escape the bloodbath. The massacre is so unwelding that many soldiers are killed. Merlin escapes luckily with Arthur, but it's too late. After striking down Morgaine, Morgaine has already hurt Arthur enough. With the poison inside of Arthur's stomach, Merlin searches for answers in ways to cure him, but it seems like it's too brutal, and Arthur is about to die. To make matters worse, Merlin must take one final battle with Morgana, in which he stabs her in the chest. After this, He leaves Arthur in a boat and sends him off to the river to plunge to its depths. However, before this, Merlin makes a reminisce to Morgana, how he just wishes it could have been different. He wishes that she didn't have to die to complete his destiny. He wishes she knew how much he loved her. Merlin sends a message back to Camelot, but decides not to return, as he prepares to live in exile until the time that Arthur Pendragon will rise again from the depths and fight for the United Kingdom against the wicked forces of Morgana. So, let's get into the scoring and the analysis overall of Merlin. It's a tragedy. It's a beautiful, beautiful tragedy about a story of love, loss, magic, and most importantly, the power of those relationships between those characters. Arthur and Merlin are a comedic duo throughout this series. Gwen is also a striving power force. She goes from a blacksmith's daughter to one of the most powerful women in Camelot. Morgana underestimates Gwen and often pushes her aside. But once she comes into power, it really begins to threaten Morgana and her ambition. Morgaine is a coward who grows from fear to doing stupidity and also into betrayal. Gaius is a wise old man who pretty much has a amalgamation idea of alchemy and magic. He doesn't show his magic, however, because as he explains to Merlin, the only way for him to survive was to plead that he was just merely an alchemist. But he does use all of his knowledge to help Merlin become the sorcerer / warlock that he becomes in the end. The only thing is, he doesn't know the sacrifice and the tragedy and the heartbreak that Merlin will endure in the end. Morgana and Merlin's relationship is the most complicated but beautiful relationship I have seen, honestly, in any show. This idea of this heart struggle between power, magic, and love, and this ideology, this consistent battle between the pair of them about what it means to have magic. Morgana has moments where she's scared before she becomes the wicked woman that she is. She's very scared and points out the idea that she wishes she had someone who understood what it feels like to have magic when Uther turns against her. And Merlin is on her shoulder, but he can't tell her. He can't tell her that he's a warlock, because he knows if he does, it will not only put him in jeopardy, but her in jeopardy, and the pair of them will go to the stake. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That is where Morgana and Merlin's story must always end. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. In the end, there will always be Merlin versus Morgana, but secretly behind it, there is the tragedy of a beautiful relationship that was just forming but never got the chance to grow. And for that reason, I give Merlin a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next series review. Till then, goodbye and good night from me.